Blizzard, cold, death. Elias, a lone ranger, fights for survival. He finds a woman, half frozen in the snow. Her eyes are filled with despair. "Save me from the cold," she whispers. "I will be yours forever." He reaches out his hand to her, not knowing that in that second he is making a deal with the devil. And the price for saving this woman is not only his life, but also a betrayal that will destroy everything he has ever known. Cold. That was the only thing that mattered in this white silence. A cold that penetrated under the skin, crawled into the very bones, freezing not only the body, but also hope itself. Elias was hunched in the saddle, his face covered by an old bandana. But even so, icy crystals pricked his skin like thousands of tiny needles. The blizzard didn't just howl, it mocked him, scoffed at his helplessness. It was a living predator, and he was the prey. The horse, a loyal steed, barely pushed through the white hell, its ears pinned back against its head. Elias knew he was lost. No stars, no sun, no landmarks. Only white, endless, deadly chaos that seemed to stretch to the end of the world. Every breath was torture, every exhale a cloud of vapor disappearing into nothingness. His fingers were numb, and he could barely hold the reins. Suddenly, the wind quieted a little, and through the veil of snow he saw her. Something dark, not like a rock or a tree. At first, he thought it was a vision. Hunger and cold were playing tricks on his mind, painting ghostly images. But as he rode closer, the vision took shape. A woman. Half buried in the snow, she lay like the dead in a deep snowdrift. Elias jumped from his horse. His feet sank into the snowy mass, and he struggled to take a few steps towards her. He began to dig with his hands. The frosty air burned his lungs. He couldn't feel his fingers, only a dull pain that reminded him he was still alive. Finally, he pulled her out. Her body was heavy and cold. She was unconscious, her hair tangled in the snow, her face pale. And when he pulled back her hood, she flinched sharply. Her eyes, the color of a mountain stream, slowly opened. Her lips were blue. She tried to speak, but only steam escaped her mouth, instantly dissolving in the air. She stared at him, her gaze filled with absolute, all-consuming despair. It was the look of a person who had already seen the end. "Save me from the cold," she rasped, her voice as weak as the rustle of an autumn leaf. "I will be yours forever." There was no pleading or begging in her words. There was a demand, a challenge, almost a bargain. And it made Elias freeze. The blizzard was getting fiercer, threatening to swallow them both. He knew that if he tried to save her, his chances of survival would drop to zero. But there was a power in her eyes that drew him in. Something in her gaze reminded him of his own past, of lost battles and unforgiven grudges. She was like him, a lone wolf in a pack of vultures. He picked her up in his arms. She was light, but her body was stiff from the cold. And in that moment, his finger slid over her palm. He felt a sharp, even cut. Not a scratch, not a wound from a fall. It was the mark of a knife or a razor, perfectly straight. Elias frowned. He looked down at the spot where he had found her. The blizzard had almost covered the tracks, but he had seen them in time. 2 sets of tracks, deep and confident, led from here to the canyon. A third set his own. Fresh ones were the only thing that indicated his presence. The deadly storm was behind them. But inside Elias's cabin, in the cramped space where the crackling of the fire was the only sound, another, colder storm was raging. Elias brought the woman, Anya, into his cabin, laid her on his bunk, covered her with blankets, and tended to her wounds. He built a fire in the fireplace. The heat was a welcome relief for his numb fingers, but the inner cold, born of suspicion, had not disappeared. She was slowly regaining consciousness. He watched her. Her face was young, but her eyes held a wisdom and weariness that belonged to people who had seen too much pain. He noticed a thin, almost invisible scar on her cheek, as if from an old cut. He tended to her palm, where there was that strange, neat cut. It was not a mark of a struggle. It was like a ritual, a seal, a vow. "There were 2 of them," she said, her voice stronger now, but still hoarse. "They were part of my caravan. We were carrying gold south." She told a story steeped in betrayal. How the men had attacked her, robbed the caravan, and then left her to die in the blizzard. She spoke calmly, without emotion, which only intensified her story. She spoke as if she was telling someone else's fate. But Elias listened carefully, feeling his inner alarm bell ringing louder and louder. He was too experienced to believe everything he heard. His own history had taught him that behind every beautiful story, a dangerous deception might be hiding. He saw her gaze slide around the cabin, taking note of the location of every object: the rifle on the wall, the revolver on the table, even his old whetstone. She was not a helpless victim seeking salvation. She was a predator who found herself in someone else's cage. "Did you see how they did this?" he asked, pointing to her hand. She looked away. It was part of their ritual, she replied, and Elias knew it was a lie. It wasn't from them. It was hers. That night, he sat by the fire, sharpening his knife. He couldn't sleep. Shadows danced on the walls, turning into ghosts of the past. The ghosts that led him here. Anya, who was lying on the bunk, sat up abruptly. Her eyes, burning in the dark, were fixed on him. He felt that she was no longer pretending to be weak. She got up and walked over to him. Her movements were graceful, like a cat's. Without a word, she took the knife from his hand. He didn't resist. He just waited. Her fingers touched the blade, but she didn't cut herself. She twirled it in her hand, the metal gleaming in the firelight. She was not scared. She was dangerous. They are still out there, she whispered. The men who abandoned me. She held the tip of the knife to his chest, barely touching his clothes. I made them a promise, and I intend to keep it. You will help me. The air in the cabin became electrified, thick with unspoken words and hidden truths. Anya still held the knife, its tip pointing at Elias's heart, but he didn't feel threatened. He felt deceived. And he was waiting for her to speak, because his inner voice was screaming that she was about to say something that would change everything. There was no caravan, she said softly, her voice no longer hoarse, but hard as steel. The gold we were carrying was from your mine. The same one you found in the canyon when we worked together. The words hit Elias like an icy fist. At first, he didn't understand. Then, like a sudden flash of lightning, everything fell into place. The faces of his former partners Jack and Sam. The smiles, the handshakes, the brotherhood they shared. It was all a lie. All this time, they had been watching him, waiting for him to find the gold, and then they simply stole it. And he, a fool, didn't realize it until it was too late. The rage that had been sleeping in him for years woke up. It was hot, searing like fire. He remembered how they celebrated, how they swore loyalty. He remembered how they left, saying they had to find something, and how he, naive, waited for them alone. They never came back. The cut on my hand, Anya continued, lowering the knife. It wasn't a ritual. It was a vow between us. A vow that I would get my share if I led them to you. I was supposed to tell them where you lived so they could finish what they started. Elias looked at her, his eyes burning. He felt his heart clench with pain and betrayal. She was just like them. Another predator. But she was honest. At least, for now. I didn't know they were going to kill you, she quickly added, seeing his gaze. I thought they would just scare you. But when they did that, I got scared. I ran away. They caught me, but I didn't tell them where I was going. They decided that since I couldn't help them, my life was worthless. Her words sounded plausible. Elias believed her, because he saw in her eyes what he saw in his own when he looked in the mirror, pain and fury. They were both victims of the same greed. But they are still here, Anya said. They are waiting. They still have the gold. If you help me, we'll take it. Half for you, half for me. Justice, Elias. And the gold. You will get back what is rightfully yours. He slowly stood up. His anger was not directed at Anya. It was at Jack and Sam. He walked to the wall and took down his rifle. He checked the cartridges, his fingers moving automatically, remembering the old days. He looked at Anya. She was dangerous. She was cold-blooded. But she was the only one who could give him a chance. The only one who could help him get back what had been taken from him. The deal is on, he said, his voice low and hard as a rock. But if you betray me, I will find you. And you will regret it. She nodded. Not a single emotion on her face. This was their agreement. They left the cabin, leaving the warm hearth behind, and got on their horses. The blizzard was gone, leaving behind a white, sparkling world. They followed the barely visible tracks that were disappearing under a fresh layer of snow. The tracks didn't lead to the canyon. They led to a small, dilapidated cabin that Elias had built with his own hands. It was hidden in the foothills, away from prying eyes. His old hunting cabin. The cabin where he had once hidden his gold, his main secret. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. The air became cold and sharp. The cold penetrated through the thick fabric of his jacket, and the air seemed to be filled with a premonition of something inevitable. Elias and Anya dismounted silently, leaving the horses tied to a tree. The cabin stood before them. It was decrepit, but Elias remembered every crack on its walls, every chip on the window frame. He remembered building it himself, hammering every board, dreaming of the future. Now it seemed ominous, like a crypt. A light flickered inside, fire. Elias pulled out his pistol, heavy and cold. Anya stood next to him, her hand resting on the hilt of her knife. Her face was as impassive as stone, her eyes as sharp and watchful as a predator's. They moved to the door as one. Elias knew their movements were synchronized, their thoughts were about the same thing. But he also knew that their goals might be different. They burst inside. The air in the cabin was thick, warm from the fire, and there were two people in it, Jack and Sam. They sat at a table, their faces lit by the flame. They looked the same as they did in his memories, only older and harsher. They flinched when they saw Elias. Their eyes widened in shock and fear. "Elias," Jack stammered, his voice trembling. "You're alive." Anya didn't give them a chance to recover. She was as quick as lightning. Before Jack could react, she was already next to him, and the knife she held in her hand was pressed to his throat. Sam, sitting opposite, reached for his revolver, but Elias was faster. He aimed his pistol at him. His hand was steady as steel. His voice was low and menacing. "The gold," he said. "Where is it?" Sam lowered his hand. He was scared. They were both scared. They revealed the location. The gold was buried under the floorboards, right under their feet. Elias and Anya began to dig, their hands moving quickly and confidently. They found a chest. Heavy, iron, full of gold. The blizzard howled outside, but inside the cabin a new storm was brewing. Elias looks at the men who betrayed him. He sees the greed that destroyed their friendship, their brotherhood. He looks at Anya, her face hard and cold. She is a woman of steel. They got the gold. The men were gone. The cabin fell silent. Elias looks at Anya, the golden glow of the fire illuminating her face. Her eyes, once full of despair, are now calculating. The pistol is still in his hand. She looks at him, her hand on the knife. The whine screams, foretelling something else. The cabin was empty. Inside, only Elias, Anya, and the chest of gold remained, lying on the floor like a silent witness to their deal. The fire in the fireplace crackled, casting golden reflections on the walls. Elias looked at the chest, at the glittering coins that were the cause of all his troubles. He felt the feelings fighting inside him, triumph and desolation. He got his gold back. But what did he lose? Anya stood to the side, her face impassive. In her eyes, once full of despair, a cold, calculating thought was now visible. She was not looking at the gold, but at Elias. She was looking at the pistol in his hand. "You know half is not fair," she said, her voice low and even. "I brought you here. I found them. I saved your gold." Elias slowly lowered his pistol. He knew she was right, but he also knew she was dangerous. He saw in her eyes not only a thirst for gold, but also a thirst for power. He was ready to give her half, but he was not ready to give her his life. He felt that this battle was not over yet. And at that moment, as the tension in the cabin reached its peak, a sinister, chilling scream ripped through the silent night from outside. It was not the wind, not an animal. It was a scream full of pain and horror. Elias and Anya froze. They both stared at the door, their faces pale with fear. They didn't know who had returned, but they knew it was not a good sign. They both lowered their weapons, their eyes met. And in that gaze, there was the same feeling they were both against the rest of the world. This battle was over, but a new one was just beginning.